Look, I think one of the things that a lot of other Asian or Asian Australian kids face is like pressure from their migrant parents because like they've often moved to a country or put you through school, whatever your situation is, because they want to see you succeed in life and have some security, and the arts do not guarantee that, you know. But I guess I was really lucky, and it's quite unusual that my parents were really supportive of whatever we wanted to do. So I'm one of 5 kids. And in our family, 2 of us are writers. Like my sister's a playwright and a screenwriter, and my other sister is a photojournalist as well. So pretty non-traditional careers. We've got 2 others who are completely normal and have, you know, normal lives and jobs and stuff like that. But we were really lucky that we had parents who said, as long as you like it, as long as you're good at it, and as long as you can make money off it, that's great. And my dad still doesn't really quite understand what I do, but that's fine. You know what I mean? So that's actually been really great and rare, because I look at my aunties and uncles and the way that they enforce their expectations on my cousins, for instance, and I know my parents are kind of freaks in that sort of way. And I guess the other thing as well is, you know, there are a lot of, I guess, Anglo practitioners out there in, say, the media and the arts landscape, and sometimes you don't see that representation of Asian people in the arts and media, and that can be a kind of an off-putting thing towards you accessing that industry as well. But I would say, one, things are starting to change. A lot of those people who are in older generations, to me, are now the mentors. You know, they were the ones who fought tooth and nail to get representation, and now they're the ones in powerful roles. You know, the fact that we've got the first managing director of the ABC, the first woman managing director, and the fact that she's Asian as well, that's a really significant thing. Things are starting to change. And the other thing I'd say is, why is it important for us to, you know, make a career in arts if we want it, is that, okay, take the TV industry, which I work in at the moment. Roughly about 1 in 10 Australians has significant Asian heritage, and that's roughly the same proportion to how many black Americans there are in the States. And when you think of black representation in US media, it's pretty robust. And even still, we're having that conversation, is there enough of it? And is it good enough? When you think of how many Asian faces there are on Australian TV, how many yellow and brown faces we've got, we don't even compare. You know, there is such a paucity of it. So I'd really encourage us to kind of mobilise and form communities to help each other as well.
No, I don't. Thank you very much for the question, Bridget, because it is a concern for me that we are not educating our medical students enough about these sorts of issues. And so at Sydney University, I'm responsible for educating the medical students around adolescent health, in particular adolescent sexual health. And I talk about, and I can't, I mean, I give them a lecture, so that's when I speak to all of them. Otherwise, I do this small group teaching, but I'm not teaching all of them. And they have a few cases, but it's really only since I've been there that they even have any of this content. There is, and it's linked to people, academics, who have an interest in the area. So there are a couple of others at Sydney University, and obviously I'm not sure, and I know that there are at UNSW, and so UNSW medical students may get a lot of exposure, but what about so many other medical schools wouldn't have that, wouldn't even teach about youth health. I mean, really, there's so few people who specialise in that area. So that is a big thing. So with respect to education of GPs, that is something that, you know, New South Wales Health are taking on. So of course we need to educate the incoming GPs through medical training, but then there's all the other GPs that are out there, and they need specific training and skills to speak to young people about sensitive topics, in particular sexuality. And they don't have the skills. That's what the young people are telling us from the studies that we're doing, the difficulties that they have to find a GP. Every so often there is a GP who's great and knows about all of these issues, and it's just because of their interest and also having been exposed to a lot of young people with those sexuality issues. So, but they're hard to find, they may not be in their area, etc. So there is a huge amount of work to do.
I think there needs to be administratively constant support. Like, not just when this quote unquote plebiscite is coming around and it's crisis period, but all the time. Like, I would love to see the high up exec at events like this, or acknowledging events like this. Like, it needs to be made clear and it needs to be loud and proud that the university executive supports LGBT people. Individual teachers, I think, have a responsibility to call out queerphobic actions, and they don't, because it's hard. It's really hard to say, actually, wait, that's messed up. Leave my classroom until you apologize, or you are at risk of expulsion, or like, it's just not enough. I also think that there needs to be more emphasis on hiring LGBT people. I think that most people in undergraduate study will have maybe like 4 stock teachers that they will see again and again. And I don't mean like the same person, but like the cishet white guy who's cool and liberal and will talk about Marxism because hell yeah, man, hip with the kids. And he wears like the sweater and the button-down shirt. And the slightly older woman who knows her stuff but will not talk about anything personal. Like, there are these stock models and all of them are great and very talented, but there is a huge diversity in academia. Like, it's absolutely astounding what people study and how they're motivated to study and how they use their personal troubles to bring around academic beauty, pretty much. And I know that affirmative action programs have been greatly criticized, but even if it's not as explicit as affirmative action, I think there needs to be more emphasis on hiring LGBT people. It will also help, the homelessness epidemic. Just putting that out there. Cool.
It's been a while since I've been at uni properly. So I was at uni for 7 years. That's too long. And then after that, I was still teaching at universities as well. But when you say, in terms of whether you're a sessional academic or a lecturer, being able to call out stuff that goes on in your classrooms as well, it has resonances with what I've been looking at with safe schools as well. The whole idea of safe schools existing is to give people in teaching and duty of care positions resources to equip them in order to handle those situations, to accommodate for queer youth as well. And I don't think that needs to stop at high schools either. Those resources are there for anyone who works with young people, and that includes, tertiary institutions as well, to be able to equip themselves in sort of understanding the concepts that you were talking about, the statistics as well, but also when you're faced with this particular situation in a classroom, how to go about dealing with it. So I think there's room for diversity training. I think there's room for equipping young tutors and academics and not so young tutors and academics as well in terms of that conversation as well. Because I know that when I was working as a sessional academic, we were some of the least equipped people in terms of teaching, and you really had to find your own way. This is probably one of many examples where you could be equipped better.
Yeah, and I agree with all of those comments. And I'd just like to say that I do think that universities have a really important role in making statements in support of same-sex marriage. And the AMA have come out and made a statement in support of same-sex marriage because of the benefits that it gives to LGBTQ people and also young people and their children. Children of same-sex parents benefit from marriage. And they've made that clear. It's based on evidence. And I think that conservative institutions making statements like that are very powerful. And I mean, there has been a reaction to that. And so that's what I think universities are very conservative institutions. They need to look at the evidence and, impartially make a statement on it. And that they need to do that. I mean, it's really important.
Again, I'm not a really good case study because if anyone's read about my mum or has seen a representation of her, like her her kind of boundaries lie left of wrong town anyway. So she was always going to be pretty open-minded. And then, but it took a long. My dad's much more like traditional Chinese kind of dad. Doesn't talk about relationships, and definitely not about sexuality. So he was the last to know, poor guy. But I knew I was going to come out to him at a certain point when he had a second in charge in his restaurant who was like a gay Thai guy, and I'm like, well, he likes him, so I'm going to have that conversation now. It kind of also helped that my parents, I mean, as hard as it was at the time, my parents split up really when I was quite young, when I was 12 years old. That was such a taboo in the Chinese community that I kind of like later on was like, well, if that's what you went through, you can't hold anything above me later on when I tell you I'm gay. But certainly I look at my cousins, for instance, and they've had a harder time as well in terms of, I've got quite a few queer cousins. And it's been a much more gently kind of approach as well. Like, yes, I'm gay, or I'm bisexual, or I'm queer, and this is my partner or whatever. And there is a lot of resistance. But what I've seen, like especially in the case of my one cousin who lives here, who's a lesbian, the fact that she has had partners this entire time that her family have eventually swung around to has been kind of great to see, because they're in it together, the partners. Like, they kind of know that they need to navigate this kind of terrain, and so having that kind of fundamental support has been really, really important to my cousin. But also in time, it's unusual for any Australian or anyone living in this country to not know queer people as well. And so, one, I guess you can always say you can have that conversation with me, but if you don't, you also know X, Y, and Z as well. You can have that conversation with them. I know that organisations like PFLAG, for instance, are becoming much more conscious of the fact that there are different needs from different Australians from different cultural backgrounds as well. And PFLAG, of course, is parents and friends of lesbians and gays. So they're doing much more work in multi-language and multi-ethnic kind of outreach as well. And I think it's also important to kind of identify allies within your family already. Because when they say, well, no one in this family will approve of that, it's just like, well, Auntie so-and-so already knows, and by the way, she's a massive leso as well. So, like, you can have that conversation, and if you've got another family member to vouch for you, I've found that really, really helpful as well. I mean, recently, it's funny, I first came out when I was 17 to my mum and then my siblings, and then I came out a few years later to my dad. But my grandma doesn't speak any English, and she only speaks Cantonese, and she's a really traditional Chinese woman. And it's kind of, because my Cantonese is so broken, it's hard enough to have a conversation about the day, let alone having a conversation about the fact that I'm gay and he's my boyfriend. So we ended up, there was this weekend, there's a whole other story, but I'm just going to tell it very, very quickly. There was a weekend away that my family was having for my sister's joint 30th and 40th birthday. And it was going to be a beach weekend. My boyfriend was going to come, partners were welcome, blah, 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 blah. And for some reason, I just thought my grandma wasn't coming because she doesn't like weekends away, especially by the beach. Typical Chinese grandma. And but she did come in the end, and my sisters forgot to tell me about that. And I'm like, but Scott's going to be there, my boyfriend. I was freaking out, but it was the end of a really long week, and I was like, I am so tired. I can't work around this. Like, we're going to be sleeping in the same bed. I'm just going to tell her this weekend. I was just so exhausted, and my boyfriend was like, what? And my sisters were like, what? And I was just like, she'll be able to handle it. She's lived through wars. You know what I mean? Like, she's dealt with worse. And so I had to kind of like get in my head the Cantonese script of what I wanted to tell her, and it would have come out like, it would have in English sounded like, Grandma, I do not like the woman. Like, it would have sounded terrible. But I told myself that if she was going to ask her usual thing about, do you have a girlfriend yet? I wouldn't do the jokey thing, which was like, I'd always throw it back to her. And it's like, well, do you have a boyfriend yet, Grandma? Like, I'd always deflect in a jokey way so I didn't have to answer the question. But I did tell myself if she was going to ask the question this time, I was going to have the conversation, and then I needed my family members to back me up as well. So I flagged with them, this is what's going to happen. And they were like, okay. And it's like, this isn't just an exchange between my grandma and me. You guys need to have my back. And so in that way, I guess, I don't know what the practical advice there is, but as much as coming out or having a conversation about sexuality and relationships is between two people, it's about making sure that you've got people behind you as well, waiting to support you, that they can do the heavy lifting for you too.